The circus came to the village on a wind of color and noise. Canvas tents swelled like giant flowers against the green hills, and lanterns blinked along the main street as if fireflies had chosen to camp for the night. Music drifted out, tinkling, triumphant, and strange, and people gathered in a ripple of curiosity and hunger for wonder. Oliver came with his father, pockets empty but eyes full of longing. He had heard about the trapeze girls and the fire breather and the bearded lady from other boys at school. But what pulled him forward through the crowd, ahead of the elephantine rumble and the ringmaster's booming voice, were the elephants, huge, slow-breathing silhouettes tethered in the shade, their flanks like living hills, their lashes sweeping dust like curtains. They stood quietly, each chained to a tiny wooden peg with a rope no thicker than a braid of straw. The rope seemed ridiculous beside them, too small to hold a creature that could uproot trees. Oliver pressed forward until he was shoulder to shoulder with his father, both of them at the edge of the enclosure. "Barber," Oliver whispered, as if the word itself might disturb some illusion, "why don't they break the rope and run away?" His father's smile was soft and wry. He guided Oliver toward a man in a faded coat, an elephant trainer whose hands were the color of saddle leather and whose eyes had learned to read the slow motions of beasts. The trainer knelt to be level with the boy, and the circus noise dimmed around them, as if the world had chosen to listen. "Look," the trainer said, his voice weathered like old rope, "when these elephants are small, we use the same rope to tie them. At that time, that rope holds them. They learn it holds them. As they grow, so do their bodies, but their minds remain with the first lesson. They believe they cannot pull free. They never try." Oliver watched the elephant blink and chew a stalk of grass as if the thought itself were tasteless. He felt something strange enough to name. It was like the beginning of a promise. Years unspooled. The circus left the village as all spectacles must, and life returned to a quieter rhythm. School books, chores, the clock on the bakery that measured out the day in warm bread and cold evenings. The memory of the trainer's words nestled into the corners of Oliver's mind like a seed in the dark. But seeds do not always bloom at once. Fear came like winter. Oliver failed an exam. He convinced himself he was not made for study and stopped trying. He stumbled at an interview. The memory of that rejection settled over him like a cloak. A small rope had tied his confidence, and his world shrank to the length of that tether. His friends pushed hard against him, coaxing, mocking, encouraging. Each attempt to drift beyond that rope was met with his own tense refusal. He had learned belief too well. On a day when the sky had the tired grayness of an overused blanket, Oliver walked without aim toward the river that threaded the valley. He sat on the bank, knees to chest, watching the water arrange itself in small, impatient wriggles. He watched himself as an object he could inspect without flinching, which made the ache feel sharper. Beside the pebble-strewn shore, a single twig protruded from the bank. From it hung a papery brown cocoon clinging like a secret. A small, tremoring silhouette moved inside. Oliver watched because there was nothing else to do, because the river had nothing to say that night, and because sometimes the world chooses to teach in small, patient ways. The butterfly wrestled itself free. At first its wing cases were wet and clumsy, and the creature's little body trembled with effort. It slipped, paused, folded inward, and tried again. The fight lasted longer than it seemed it could. A dog could have set it free in 2 eager mouthfuls, or a child could have plucked it from the branch in a gesture of kindness, yet the butterfly struggled alone. Each attempt left it weaker for a moment, then stronger. Finally, with a tiny, almost ridiculous flutter, its wings filled with air and color, it folded into itself once more, then unfurled like a banner. It rose, wavering, then steadied and flew into the grey afternoon like a single point of hope. Oliver's throat tightened until he could hardly breathe. The river talked in ripples and the sky pretended not to look. He found his hand reaching unconsciously toward the rope loop of his past, those small, invisible cords that had been tied to his mind since childhood. The trainer's words came back as if spoken yesterday. The memory of the elephant's patient ignorance uncoiled within him. That evening, standing before a mirror in his small, dim room, Oliver looked at the person who had been living by the rules of a childhood not. He put a hand on his chest and felt the quick, nervous knocking of a heart that had been patient under a rope for too long. He whispered, not certain whether he spoke to his reflection, to the room, or to some part of himself that still believed in ropes, "The rope in my life is only in my mind." The first action he took was tiny. He made a list. On the top, try again. Beneath it, 1 application. 1 class. One conversation. Each line was a pebble tossed into the river of his life. Each small splash shaped new ripples. At the job fair he visited the next week, his hands trembled as he handed over his resume. He thought of the elephant, of the trainer's tired voice, of the butterfly's first shaky flight. He did not win the job that day, but he didn't walk away crushed. He walked away with a conversation logged in his head, a name that might call back, a promise to return. He enrolled in a night class months later, knees shaking through the first lesson, and then the second. Mistakes came in honest floods, but he corrected them, wrote them down, learned the map of his own errors. He failed an exam again, and this time he sat with it until failure changed from an end to an instruction manual. Revise, retake, improve. And when a friend's startup needed someone to organize deliveries, Oliver volunteered, then stayed, then learned spreadsheets until the columns began to make sense like arranged books. Opportunities that had once seemed sealed tight began to look like doors someone else had not noticed. He pushed. Some doors creaked, some refused, and one day a window opened. Years later, when the village's seasons had worn different faces across the fields, Oliver returned to the river and found, by the same pebble row, a young boy staring at the water and at a troop of cranes in the distance. The boy's clothes were patched. His mouth was full of all the questions that do not yet have answers. Oliver watched the child's gaze shift to a rusted pole with a rope tied to it, holding a small cart in place. The rope was thin and seemed somehow to pin the entire village's future to one small truth. He remembered the trainer, the elephants, the cocoon, the mirror. He remembered the quiet, stubborn alchemy of trying again. He sat beside the boy and did not begin with a lecture. He began with a story. "You see those animals?" he asked, and pointed out to the fields where a pair of oxen labored, strong and steady. The boy nodded. "They learned, once, that they could not move their cart," Oliver said. "They were small and someone tied them. They grew big, but their minds did not. For years, they simply did what they had been taught to do." The boy blinked. "So they are stupid." "Not stupid," Oliver corrected gently. "Trained. It takes a moment of courage to try again. Sometimes the rope that keeps us is not outside at all. It's in our heads, doubt, fear, a single failure told in 1,000 ways." The boy hesitated, then asked the question that had started so many lives. "How do you break it?" Oliver reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, battered piece of paper, his first resume, yellowed, edges rounded from nervous handling. He laughed, quietly, and handed it to the boy. "You start small. You try. You push when it's easier to shrink. You fail and fail again, and then one day your hands remember how to make a thing that helps you." He told the tale of the butterfly and how it had fought not because anyone freed it, but because it would have remained only a promise otherwise. He spoke of the elephants not with anger but with pity, and of a trainer who taught a lesson that life would later unteach. And when the boy left, slingshot tucked in his back pocket, head full of misgivings and the kind of dangerous hope that preludes great things, Oliver felt the rope of his own old days loosen. What changed his life wasn't a single triumphant leap so much as 1,000 small climbs. He took jobs that taught him humility. He attended evenings when others slept. He met people who offered doors and people who slammed them. He learned to distinguish which warnings were kindness and which were merely caution garbed as prophecy. The rope in his mind frayed, then gave. The village learned another thing that season. Not every binding is true. You can see it in the way young men tried new trades and in the way an old woman finally took the bus to the city. You could see it in how a boy started teaching calculus to children who thought numbers were chains. Someone painted the rope on the wall of the school, a mural of an elephant staring at a frayed rope, and under it one word, remember. Years later, people pointed to Oliver as if he were a quiet sort of marvel. He neither wanted nor sought that title. He kept his hands busy and his heart cautious but open. When the circus returned, older and smaller somehow, he took his child to see the elephants, and he watched the boy scratch behind the ear of a creature that had once been bound to an idea. The trainer, older now, the rope of his own habits loosened by time and travel, smiled across the enclosure. They shared, without words, an understanding that had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with the slow art of unlearning. The lesson stayed with Oliver like a lived-in coat. There will always be ropes, thin histories and harsh admonitions that claim they define us. Sometimes they began in childhood, sometimes in a single failed day, sometimes in the silence between two people who might have shown mercy. Yet ropes are only as strong as the faith you give them. Pull at them enough, and you will discover either that they are pinned to something immovable, or that they are paper thin. On quiet nights, Oliver walked to the river and watched the water do what water does: move forward. He remembered the butterfly's first flight, the surprising alchemy of small attempts. He sometimes turned that memory into a small act, teaching a neighbor's daughter to balance a budget, helping a boy write his very first apology letter, sitting with someone who feared going back to school. People change not because they are suddenly different at heart, but because they keep making the small choice to move. It is not always dramatic. It is often a long, stubborn unraveling of a lie. The village knew it, enough to tell the story to their children like a hymn. There was once a boy named Oliver who looked at the elephants and learned to ask, "Why not me?" And then did the patient, often boring, always brave work of answering his own question. One spring morning, when the blossoms on the riverbank were as plastered with petals as any celebration, a man passing by saw a boy, now a young man, help an old ox slip free of a thin, improbable rope that had been left wrapped around its leg for years. The man paused, impressed, and asked how he had managed it. Oliver only smiled and said what he had always learned from small things: start small. Believe a little. Try again. And in the soft afterglow of such simple courage, the village kept walking forward, untying the ropes they had been taught to fear.